Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. The Grand Heaven Master's expression had returned to normal, and it was impossible to tell what he was thinking. Looking at Bai Xiaochun, he coolly said, "Tell me your idea." Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath, and then began to explain. "Grand Heaven Master, I can give you an opportunity to have all of the nobility and aristocracy show for themselves how they feel. Your humble servant is not perceptive enough to tell what those wily old foxes are thinking. But you, Grand Heaven Master, can likely discern that from both their wording and the fluctuations of their divine souls." At this point, Bai Xiaochun's idea had come together. Eyebrows dancing up and down, he continued, "Your humble servant's plan is the type that will shake heaven and earth to the point where ghosts and gods will weep. It's simply amazing. Call it a deadly move, if you'd like, something that can pierce through the hearts of men." He even thumped himself on the chest to emphasize his words. Then he waited for the Grand Heaven Master to ask him to explain the plan in detail. However, after a long moment passed, the Grand Heaven Master's expression was still placid. Eventually, Bai Xiaochun started to feel a bit awkward. Clearing his throat, he shook his head and kept on speaking. "To employ this deadly move of mine, it's important that all of the nobility and aristocracy be present. In fact, the Arch-Emperor also needs to be there. Grand Heaven Master, is there any upcoming event or ceremony that everyone will need to attend?" Heart-pounding in anticipation, he looked at the Grand Heaven Master. The Grand Heaven Master peered back at him for a moment before his eyes widened. "Next month, we have the ancestral sacrifices. Since you're so confident, we can try out your so-called deadly move then, and see what happens." The Grand Heaven Master didn't ask for any more details about the plan. He flicked his sleeve, causing Bai Xiaochun's vision to swim for a moment. When things became clear, he was outside of the Imperial Palace. He didn't even ask any details. Don't tell me he thinks I'm just grandstanding or something. Looking back in the direction of Heaven Master Hall, he snorted coldly in his heart. When Bai Xiaochun makes a move, he frightens even himself. Whatever. When the time comes, I'll show the Grand Heaven Master and everybody else exactly how terrifying I am. Brimming with confidence, he began to review his plan, and before long, could visualize a whole series of scenes involving what would happen. He could hardly wait. He even laughed aloud at the mere thought of the wonderful things to come. Feeling splendid, he led his 1,000 corpse troopers back to the inspections manor. Back at the manor, he summoned Zhou Yixing over to give a debriefing. Then he assigned a location in the inspections manor to him, and went into his own hall to meditate. At the moment, he had no time or energy to spend on Song Ke. He was fully focused on his upcoming plan. In fact, as soon as the door of his hall closed, he called Bai Hao out of his soul-hoarding pagoda and began to explain the plan to him in full detail. As Bai Hao listened, his eyes grew wider and wider. In the end, he gasped. "Master, did you really think up this plan?" he asked, sounding a bit uncertain. Bai Xiaochun was actually very pleased with Bai Hao's reaction. "Of course Master thought it up," he said, thumping himself on the chest. "What do you think? Awesome, huh? This plan is ruthless." Bai Hao replied with heartfelt admiration. "Especially considering that the Arch-Emperor will be there. I bet the nobility and aristocracy are going to go crazy. Of course, the key to it all lies, not in the plan itself, but in how perceptive the Grand Heaven Master is." With that, he and Bai Xiaochun worked together for a bit to perfect the plan even more. In the end, Bai Xiaochun was very pleased with it all. Time just moves too slowly sometimes. I wish the sacrifices were being held tomorrow. Although he was feeling very excited, he managed to calm down eventually. Considering that he had just taken care of the heavenly marquises from the Li and Chen clans, he knew that the city in general would be in a bit of an uproar. Obviously, now wasn't the time to go about making any further trouble. Therefore, he decided to go into secluded meditation for the next month. Back during the competition with Sun Yifan and Sima Dao, he had reached the Flame Harmony realm and gained much enlightenment of 17-colored flame. He had also made further advancement because of subsequent tests. Therefore, during his month of secluded meditation, he spent time to make even more progress. The month went by very quickly. During that time, panic built within Arch-Emperor City. The fact that the Grand Heaven Master had arrested Heavenly Marquis Chen and Heavenly Marquis Li, and that their clans had been shaken down, was shocking news to say the least. All of the Heavenly Marquises in the city were nervous, and even the Heavenly Dukes were feeling the pressure. It was as if all of them could smell the reek of blood wafting through the streams of time from that original occasion in which the Inspections Commissioner had wreaked havoc. Although all of them had been prepared for something to happen after Bai Xiaochun was appointed as the inspections commissioner, none of them could have guessed that it would happen so soon. The Grand Heaven Master had moved with lightning-like decisiveness. 4 hours. 4 hours was all it took for 2 heavenly marquises to be implicated, and 2 entire clans to be shaken down and then imprisoned. The name of Bai Hao rocked Arch-Emperor City as violently as a windstorm. In fact, to many people in the know, it was obvious that the city had completely changed since he had arrived. This Bai Hao is a star of calamity that brings disaster with him. Ruthless. I was there when Bai Hao shook down those 2 clans, and let me tell you, he took everything, down to the grass. Well, you can't blame Bai Hao. There was always friction between him and the aristocracy. Eventually it reached the point where only one party could come out on top. All sorts of talk spread, not just in Arch-Emperor City, but in the wildlands in general. The news even reached the cities belonging to the 4 heavenly kings. All of the chosen who had butted heads with Bai Xiaochun in the necromancer kettle were trembling in fear. The tragic fate of Li Tiansheng had them all on edge. Furthermore, their clans all instituted severe restrictions on them, forbidding them from going out into the city. Everyone knew that although they could secretly plot against Bai Xiaochun, they couldn't make any open moves against him. Most of the parties involved all felt bad for each other, and were acting with full vigilance. At the same time, their desire to kill Bai Xiaochun grew more and more intense. Furthermore, because no one dared to offend the Grand Heaven Master, all of their killing intent came to be focused fully on Bai Xiaochun. Normally, the nobility and aristocracy were always at each other's throats, but at the moment, they were all part of a strange alliance. It didn't matter whether or not they were truly loyal to the Arch-Emperor. The fact that 2 heavenly marquises had been taken out had them all nervous to the extreme. Although some parties hoped that going to offer greetings to the Grand Heaven Master would help, many of them were trying to figure out a way to have Bai Xiaochun killed. Unfortunately for those people, he stayed out of sight for an entire month. The people who wanted him dead couldn't very well storm the inspections manor, and therefore, they could only watch time go by as the day of ancestral sacrifices neared. Everyone in the wildlands took the matter of ancestral sacrifices very seriously. Whether it was the clans or the tribes, that day was a day of grand ceremony for the entire Arch-Emperor dynasty. The Arch-Emperor was always present for such sacrifices, and that was an important factor, even though he was a mere puppet. Furthermore, unless there were some unforeseen circumstances, all of the nobility and aristocracy had to show up as well. The only major players who wouldn't be present were the 4 heavenly kings. They wouldn't come to Arch-Emperor City unless some sort of heaven-shaking, earth-shattering event occurred. Of course, the reason for that was their very delicate relationship with the Grand Heaven Master. Although things seemed to be calm between the heavenly kings and the Grand Heaven Master, if the heavenly kings ever came to Arch-Emperor City, and something went wrong, the implications could be very severe. Instead of coming personally, they would usually send their heirs apparent to represent them. The person to whom the sacrifices were offered was none other than the first-generation Arch-Emperor. It didn't matter how many years had passed since his time, to the people of the Arch-Emperor dynasty, that very first Arch-Emperor was the most ultimate of entities. Apparently, the ancestral sacrifices also had some connection to the Hell Emperor. After all, whenever the sacrifices were carried out, heaven and earth would be split open to reveal the underworld river inside of a massive vortex. The vortex would cover all of Arch-Emperor City, and would be filled with countless souls which would descend onto the city for the benefit of the people, who could simply reach out to take them. According to the legends, a diva soul had once descended in such a fashion. Furthermore, it wasn't just the nobility and aristocracy of the Arch-Emperor dynasty who would participate in the event, the common people could do so as well. Of course, although the nobility and aristocracy would reach out and take the souls, most didn't focus too much on that part of the event. To them, it was merely a good omen. When the day came to offer the sacrifices, all of Arch-Emperor City was filled with a very somber air. Families emerged from their houses and dropped to their knees on the street to kowtow to the heavens. At the same time, bells tolled in the imperial palace, filling the city with their sound. The heavenly marquises and heavenly dukes all donned their most formal attire and headed to the main square in the imperial palace, tranquil expressions on their faces the entire time. That was when Bai Xiaochun emerged from secluded meditation. As he did, it was impossible for him to conceal the expression of excitement and anticipation that appeared on his face as he looked up at the city in the sky. I finally succeeded with 17-colored flame. And now, it's time for the ancestral sacrifices. Sighing, he flew up into the air, followed by 1,000 corpse troopers. As the bells tolled, the streets of Arch-Emperor City filled with a sea of people. It was the same up above, too, with countless figures flying up to the imperial palace. The city guard was out in full force to keep order and make sure that nothing unexpected happened on this day of ancestral sacrifice. Of course, there was little chance of something like that. The city guard carried out their duties with the utmost loyalty. In fact, the area near the inspections manor was especially heavily guarded. The matter with the two heavenly marquises the previous month had been monumental. The new inspections commissioner had made a huge splash, and was the target of almost universal animosity in the dynasty. If any mishaps occurred regarding him, it could affect the ancestral sacrifices, and that was something the city guard couldn't let happen. Even as the city guard paid special attention to keep the inspections manor safe, Bai Xiaochun flew up from inside of it, surrounded by 1,000 corpse troopers. As he did, the nearby nobles and aristocrats noticed, and many gazes came to be fixed on him. They all contained mixed emotions, with everything from hatred to fear. When Bai Xiaochun sensed so many people looking at him, he cleared his throat, clasped his hands behind his back, and stuck his chin up. He even glared back at the people who looked at him with hateful expressions, making it look like he wasn't afraid of anything in the world. His haughty expression said it all: if you've got what it takes, then bring it on. And that was the truth. He had the backing of the Grand Heaven Master, as well as 1,000 corpse troopers. That meant that Bai Xiaochun could stare down the heavenly dukes if he wanted to, much less the heavenly marquises. When the noble and aristocratic cultivators flying in the air sensed Bai Xiaochun's attitude, they frowned, then looked fearfully at his corpse troopers before returning their focus to the imperial palace and flying onward. What a bunch of wusses! All shaking in their boots at the sight of the inspections commissioner. Feeling very pleased, he continued to swagger his way slowly onward toward the imperial palace. Of course, it wasn't just the nobility and aristocracy flying through the air who noticed Bai Xiaochun. The common people down below in the city, countless soul cultivators and savage giants, all watched Bai Xiaochun flying upward. Inspections Commissioner Bai Hao, that's him. Last month, he shook down the clans of 2 heavenly marquises. Nobody's seen him for a month, but now that it's time for the ancestral sacrifices, here he is. He's definitely going to cause another scene. In response to the buzz of conversation, the city guards in the area grew more vigilant. Although they didn't flock to surround Bai Xiaochun, they did look around with killing intent, ready to leap to intervene if anything unexpected happened. Feeling very well protected, Bai Xiaochun continued onward with keen anticipation of what was to come. The mere thought of his plans for the ancestral sacrifices had him so excited he could hardly control himself. My month of secluded meditation was very productive. I finally succeeded with 17 colored flame, and Hauer made significant progress in his auguries of 18 colored flame. I bet it won't be long before the formula for 18 colored flame is complete. Once I have that formula, and succeed in conjuring that flame, then I'll finally be an earthly necromancer. Having reached this point in his train of thought, he shivered in anticipation. At the moment, it seemed as if the sky were the limit, and it was truly a wonderful feeling. There are only 3 earthly necromancers in all of the wildlands. If I succeed, then I'll be the 4th. In the wildlands, earthly necromancers were so rare that their position was roughly the same as the heavenly dukes. In fact, in some ways, they actually surpassed the heavenly dukes. As long as such a person didn't betray the wildlands, they could do anything they pleased. They could even commit grave offenses that were normally punished with the death penalty, but be exempt because of their position. After all, there were dozens of devas in the wildlands, but there were only 3 earthly necromancers. But that's only secondary. The most important thing is that if I can conjure 18 colored flame, then that means I could perform spirit enhancements on my nascent soul. In one fell swoop, I could push my cultivation base all the way to the late nascent soul stage. Such thoughts made Bai Xiaochun even more excited. After all, he was currently in the mid-nascent soul stage, but could defeat half devas in battle. If he reached the late nascent soul stage, then he could most likely win against a true diva. Even if I can't, well, just wait until I'm in the Great Circle. Then I'll definitely be able to defeat devas. Bai Xiaochun couldn't have been in higher spirits. He even picked up speed as he headed toward the imperial palace. He and his corpse troopers were bright beams of light that shot toward the east gate of the palace. As he approached, a middle-aged man could be seen off in the distance. He was threatening without being angry, dressed in a long golden robe embroidered with images of suns, moons, and clouds. Overall, he looked extremely impressive. Furthermore, whenever people passed him by, they would respectfully clasp hands and bow in greeting. That man was none other than one of the 10 heavenly dukes, Chen Haosong. He wasn't standing there alone. Next to him was a tall, well-built man wearing an official robe embroidered with a golden python. From his burly frame, it was possible to tell that he possessed extraordinary fleshly body power, and yet, he stood respectfully a full pace behind Chen Haosong. As soon as Bai Xiaochun caught sight of Chen Haosong, he snorted coldly in his heart. As for Chen Haosong, a cold gleam passed through his eyes, along with an expression of revulsion that he did nothing to conceal. Bai Xiaochun had seen the burly man before as well. He closely resembled Zhao Dongshan, and was in fact one of the senior members of Zhao Dongshan's clan. He was not an ordinary heavenly marquis, but rather, one of the 9 extremely powerful heavenly marquises who had ganged up on Bai Xiaochun. The burly man glanced at Bai Xiaochun, and then laughed coldly. "The ancestral sacrifices are for heavenly dukes and heavenly marquises," he said in a booming voice. "What is this trash doing here?" His voice was so loud that all of the assembled nobility and aristocracy near the East Gate could hear him quite clearly. None of those people had a very good impression of Bai Xiaochun, so they immediately broke out into scornful glances as they looked over at him. Bai Xiaochun's anger flared, and he glared back at them. Considering that he had the full support of the Grand Heaven Master, he wasn't scared of these people at all. In fact, he immediately pointed at the burly man. "This person has disrespected the Grand Heaven Master. Arrest him." His 1,000 corpse troopers immediately looked up, and then 100 of them charged toward the burly man. Never could this man have guessed that Bai Xiaochun would dare to take action here, at the east gate of the imperial palace, on the day of the ancestral sacrifices. Expression flickering, he was just about to back up when Chen Haosong interrupted with a cold snort. "Enough with the melodrama," he said, taking a step forward. His voice echoed with explosive might, causing the advancing corpse troopers to tremble visibly, and then lurch to a stop, as if they had been sealed in place. At the same time, Chen Haosong's foot landed, and explosive energy surged out from him. A windstorm immediately kicked up, grabbing the 100 corpse troopers and hurling them back toward Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun's eyes widened into a deeper glare, and he was just about to say something when Chen Haosong spoke. "Zhao Xianglin is a heavenly marquis, and is within his rights to berate you. If you won't bow your head and accept it, fine, but how dare you go and slander? The Grand Heaven Master himself appointed me as the inspections commissioner." Bai Xiaochun interrupted loudly, sticking his chin up. "He expressly ordered me to participate in the ancestral sacrifices. For Zhao Xianglin to speak so rudely, and even berate me, is equivalent to him countermanding the decrees of the Grand Heaven Master. For me to say that he is showing disrespect is actually letting him off the hook lightly." "You," Zhao Xianglin blurted angrily. Although he had heard that this Bai Hao was relatively sharp-tongued, he had never imagined that he could so easily twist matters to make it seem like Zhao Xianglin himself was insulting the Grand Heaven Master. "Is that all you can say? You, if you've got what it takes, then see if you can fight all 1,000 of my corpse troopers. If 1,000 is too much, then how about 100? Pick any 100 you like, and see if you don't end up dying by my hands." As Bai Xiaochun spoke, the murderous aura coming from his 1,000 corpse troopers grew even more intense. "How shameless!" Zhao Xianglin growled through gritted teeth. Although he was one of the strongest among the heavenly marquises, there was no way he could defeat 100 corpse troopers in a fight, much less 1,000. The corpse troopers didn't fear death at all, and had the toughest bodies imaginable. When they attacked, they caused blood to splash, and didn't stop until the battle was over. "Did you just say that I'm shameless? How could the Grand Heaven Master appoint a shameless person to be the inspections commissioner, a position which requires uprightness and resistance to flattery? You're basically saying that the Grand Heaven Master is blind, aren't you?" Bai Xiaochun's eyes flickered with delight. If this Zhao Xianglin had just kept his mouth shut, it would have been a lot better for him. Everything he said could be found fault with. "Zhao Xianglin, you clearly suspect me, the inspections manor as a whole, and the Grand Heaven Master himself. Could it be that you are in fact an accomplice of the traitorous heavenly marquises from the Li and Chen clans?" With that, he waved his hand and said, "Men, take charge of the entrance to the imperial palace. Let everyone in except for this miscreant Zhao Xianglin." A large contingent of corpse troopers immediately rushed over to block the east gate of the imperial palace. The other nobles and aristocrats in the area couldn't help but gasp at the sight of Bai Xiaochun's ruthless tactics. For many, it provided a very clear picture of this person whom they had never actually witnessed in action. It also went to further how threatening he seemed to them. As for the city guards, they looked on with wry smiles. After all, this was not a situation they could interfere with. The only thing they could do was report the matter to their superiors. The entire thing was a huge headache as far as Chen Haosong was concerned. To him, Bai Xiaochun was like a stick covered with thorns. Although he should have been easy to snap in half, the thorns made him very difficult to deal with. If that were all there were to it, it might not be a big deal. But Bai Xiaochun was completely sharp-tongued. He turned black into white if he wanted, and if one wasn't extremely careful with one's wording, he could easily twist words into weapons. Seeing how furious Zhao Xianglin was, Chen Haosong frowned and said, "Enough." Waving his sleeve, he sent another blast of wind out to sweep away the corpse troopers Bai Xiaochun had just sent to block the door. Even Bai Xiaochun was hit by the wind, and was pushed backward a few dozen meters. In the instant that Bai Xiaochun was pushed back, Chen Haosong blurred into motion, entering the east gate. As for Zhao Xianglin, he gritted his teeth and followed, casting a murderous glance at Bai Xiaochun over his shoulder as he did. The rest of the nobility and aristocracy were all essentially on the same side in the matter, and had no good feelings regarding Bai Xiaochun whatsoever. They also took to motion, flying through the east gate. Bai Xiaochun was not pleased at all with what was happening. "Using a high cultivation base to trample people below you, huh?" he said loudly. "Well, if you were as tough as you think you are, then you would fight my corpse troopers." While Bai Xiaochun grumbled to himself a bit, the city guards averted their gazes and sighed. It was really an awkward thing to hear the inspections commissioner, who was backed by the Grand Heaven Master, complaining about people relying on high cultivation bases to accomplish things. After everyone else entered the imperial palace, Bai Xiaochun clasped his hands behind his back, stuck his chin up, and headed toward the east gate. His corpse troopers followed. However, when the city guards saw that, one of them braced himself and stepped in the way. Although he wasn't very happy to have to do this, he had no choice but to say, "Exalted Inspections Commissioner. On the day of ancestral sacrifices, your subordinates aren't permitted to enter." With that, he stood there looking nervously at Bai Xiaochun. "Huh?" Bai Xiaochun said, taken aback. After confirming that he had heard correctly, he stood there, flabbergasted. "They can't go in? Wait a second, there are a whole bunch of people in there with cultivation bases higher than me. And they all want to kill me. If I go in alone, I'll be in way too much danger." Nervous, he tried to negotiate with the city guard, but the man could only smile wryly and shake his head. At this point, Bai Xiaochun's face fell. If he had known that things would be like this, he would have just held his tongue earlier. As he stood there hesitating, he realized that the bells were about to stop tolling. Sighing, he ordered the corpse troopers to stand guard near the gate, and then cautiously entered the imperial palace. Once inside, he did not look like he had moments ago, like the type of person who wasn't afraid of anything in the world. Instead, he exercised the utmost caution, and even walked as quietly as was possible. Thankfully, because he was actually arriving a bit late, all of the members of the nobility and aristocracy were already in the main square. Furthermore, there were plenty of guards around to show the way. As such, he arrived at the square just as the bells finished tolling. The square was huge, and featured 18 enormous pillars with coiling dragons on them that were so high that they seemed to touch the heavens above. The ground was covered with green limestone slabs that emanated spiritual energy. In the middle of the square was a huge bell, which was still reverberating from the tolling moments ago. A ring of soul cultivator guards surrounded the bell, all of them wearing somber expressions. In two positions of honor on the left side of the square were Mistress Red Dust and Zhou Hong. In the positions of honor on the right side were the junior champion King Gongsun Yi, and the heir apparent of Spirit Advent City, the older brother of Shushan. Clearly, these four represented the four heavenly kings. Not a single one of them acknowledged Bai Xiaochun's presence, and merely stood in place with their eyes closed. Behind those four were the 10 heavenly dukes, including Chen Haosong, who stood third from the left. Behind the 10 heavenly dukes were the more than 100 heavenly marquises. Among them was Zhao Xianglin, who cast a frosty glance at Bai Xiaochun, and snorted coldly. All of the heavenly marquises and heavenly dukes were organized by rank. Behind them were other important government officials, who were all high-ranking and powerful. There were several thousand of them, and each one wore an expression of devout respect. Bai Xiaochun had a spot among the larger group. However, considering that he was more important than any of the other officials, he actually stood in front of them, just behind the heavenly marquises. Few of the important officials had ever seen Bai Xiaochun, although most had heard stories about him. They knew that he was different from the heavenly marquises and heavenly dukes, and actually, few of them had ill feelings toward him. In fact, many of them wished to ingratiate themselves to him. When Bai Xiaochun saw that most of the officials were looking at him with goodwill in their eyes, he sighed with relief, and even gave a few smiles and nods to them. Then he looked over at the main hall of the imperial palace, and a strange feeling rose up inside of him. The Arch-Emperor. Although the Grand Heaven Master holds all of the power, the Arch-Emperor is the true representative of the imperial clan. He is the official ruler of the Wildlands. For all he knew, he was the first person from the Heavenspan River region to stand in this square in the imperial palace. And perhaps he would be the last. The fact that his journey through the Wildlands had landed him in this spot caused him to sigh with pride. Just wait until I get back to the river-defying sect and recount all of my stories to Xiaomei, Junwan, Big Fatty Zhang and Uncle Li. Then, he blinked and refocused on the violet-colored main hall. The hall itself was built from 9 golden dragon statues that looked so lifelike they seemed they might fly up into the sky at any moment. Just looking at the place caused pressure to weigh down on Bai Xiaochun. He could also sense that those 9 golden dragons were a spell formation of some sort. All the other times I came to the Imperial Palace, I visited Heaven Master Hall. This is my first time visiting the main hall of the palace. I wonder what the Arch-Emperor actually looks like. After enough time passed for an incense stick to burn, the previously silent bell once again rang out loud and clear. Then, the door of the main hall slowly opened, and the 9 golden dragons opened their eyes. Incredible energy surged out, and everyone in the audience could hear something like the roaring chant of dragons. Those who listened closely soon found themselves slipping into a daze. Bai Xiaochun was no exception. Even as he looked on, the open door revealed a dozen extremely good-looking soul cultivators. Some were men and some were women, but all of them wore extravagant robes. One of them was none other than the second prince. These were the princes and princesses of the imperial clan, although not all of them. They were only a small group who represented the whole. In front of that group were 2 old men whose hands were tucked into the opposite sleeves of their voluminous robes. They were stooped over, and didn't seem very impressive, and yet there was something very sinister about them. Beyond the 2 old men, at the very end of the hall, were 2 thrones, one large and one small. The large throne was completely golden in color, and was of course the dragon throne. Sitting upon it was a middle-aged man wearing imperial robes and an imperial crown. Although it was impossible to make out his features clearly at first, there was something grand and noble about him. His appearance, coupled with the chanting roar of the dragons, made him truly seem like the most paragon entity in all creation. This godlike figure was none other than the reigning Arch-Emperor. Bai Xiaochun was shaken. Although he couldn't make out the expression on the face of the Arch-Emperor, he could sense the man's eyes. They seemed to contain stars and heavenly bodies, and were the type that would leave a person's mind reeling to simply gaze upon them. However, that sensation quickly passed as his gaze was drawn to the smaller throne. Although that throne was smaller, it was actually placed on a higher level than the dragon throne itself. It was pitch black, and seemingly ordinary in all aspects. It was empty at the moment, but everyone in the square, including all of the ministers and generals of the imperial court, were all looking at it. That throne belonged to the Grand Heaven Master. Even as everyone stared at that black throne, one of the stooped old men called out in a piercing voice, "Grand Heaven Master, your presence is requested." As his voice rang out, the clouds above seethed, and the enormous dragon that had been so curious about Bai Xiaochun in the past suddenly lowered its head. Then it roared, a roar that suppressed the call of the 9 dragons down below as, at the same time, the Grand Heaven Master mysteriously appeared on the black throne. Everyone present was shaken, even the heavenly dukes. Simultaneously, they all averted their gazes, clasped hands, and bowed. "Greetings, Grand Heaven Master. Greetings, Arch-Emperor." The thousands of people gathered outside of the hall clasped hands in formal greeting, their voices ringing out to shake heaven and earth. Inside the hall, the second prince and the other members of the imperial clan didn't dare to reveal a trace of defiance, and also offered formal greetings. Only the Arch-Emperor himself didn't join in. His hands tightened onto the arms of the dragon throne for a moment, but then relaxed. As for Bai Xiaochun, he was measuring up both the Arch-Emperor and the Grand Heaven Master. "So, this is the Arch-Emperor?" he murmured to himself. "Doesn't seem like much when compared to the Grand Heaven Master." The echo of the voices lasted for a moment before fading away. As for the Grand Heaven Master, he sat on his throne, face completely expressionless, seemingly there only to observe the ancestral sacrifices, and not inclined to speak at all. The Arch-Emperor let the moment stretch out for a bit, then looked at the 2 stooped, sinister old men, and nodded slightly. Having been given this vague order from the Arch-Emperor, the 2 old men exchanged a glance, and both of them could see in the other's eyes that they were fearful of the Grand Heaven Master's reaction. After a moment, one of them turned to face the square outside of the hall and began to recite the sacrificial invocation. As his words echoed out, they seemed to contain a bizarre resonance which caused the clouds up above to churn into the form of a vortex. As the vortex spun and grew larger, the enormous dragon from earlier vanished. The strange portents didn't provoke a reaction from the crowd, as though they had been expecting all of this. However, it was Bai Xiaochun's first time witnessing the event, and he couldn't help but stare in shock. Gradually, the vortex grew so large that it covered all of Arch-Emperor City. As it did, it was possible to see something inside of the vortex, an enormous river. Bai Xiaochun held his breath in shock as he realized that the river inside the vortex was emanating a powerful aura of death. The underworld river, he murmured. By this point, despite the fact that Bai Xiaochun was all the way up in the sky in the imperial palace, he could actually hear the droning sound of the common people down in Arch-Emperor City, offering expressions of worship and praise. Because the vortex was so enormous, it was possible to see the underworld river very clearly, even the flowing water which made it up. The aura of death which flowed out of the vortex gradually filled the entire area, leaving Bai Xiaochun feeling quite shaken. It was a very shocking sight. It almost looked as though an enormous eye had opened up, allowing everyone to peer through it to view the underworld river. At the same time, it was as if that eye were looking out at all creation in the outside world. It was a very strange sensation, the likes of which Bai Xiaochun had never experienced before. Even as Bai Xiaochun stared in shock, the old man finished the sacrificial invocation. As he uttered the concluding words, he waved his sleeve. Let the ceremony begin. His words rang out like the sounding of a bell, and as they did, shocking rumbling sounds could be heard from the vortex. It was almost as if an enormous, invisible hand had slapped the underworld river, causing a huge wave to rise up. It was a frothy wave composed of countless souls, which then poured through the vortex. It was in spectacular and magnificent fashion that a rain of souls began to pour down. Endless numbers of souls began to fall onto Arch-Emperor City. They covered everything, and most importantly of all, they all seemed to be sleeping. Even if a diva soul appeared, it would also be in a state of slumber, and could be grabbed by whatever hands were lucky enough to reach it. A cheer rose up from Arch-Emperor City as the excited commoners sprang into action, hoping to benefit from the favor offered during the ancestral sacrifices. The guards in the imperial palace reached out to grab falling souls, as did Mistress Red Dust and the other powerful people like her. The heavenly dukes, heavenly marquises, and even the government officials all did the same. Of course, to them, in this collecting of souls during the ancestral sacrifices, what was most important was not the number of souls harvested, but the type. Anyone who managed to get a diva soul would be benefiting from an incredibly good omen. However, diva souls didn't always appear during the ancestral sacrifices, only every so often. The scene playing out caused Bai Xiaochun to gasp. He looked around with a strange light gleaming in his eyes, and even anticipation. Now was the time for him to carry out his plan. Afterward, it was likely that the nobility and aristocracy would hate him even more than they already did. Well, I can't worry about all that. They never liked me to begin with. Even if I didn't go through with this plan, they would eventually make another move against me. Gritting his teeth, he leapt into the air, trembling with both excitement and nervousness. When Bai Xiaochun took to motion, the Grand Heaven Master's eyes opened just a crack to look at him. It only took a moment after Bai Xiaochun flew up into the air that he reached out and grabbed one of the descending souls. It was a Foundation Establishment level soul. As soon as his hand closed around it, his eyes went wide, and he gasped. An expression of disbelief filled his face, but it quickly turned to joy. He even threw his head back and laughed uproariously. Heavens! I can't believe I actually got a soul like this. His laughter was loud enough to begin with, but he actually amplified it with some cultivation-based power, which attracted quite a bit of attention. Before anyone could see clearly what had happened, though, he flew back down toward the area of the main hall in the imperial palace. It was with lightning-like speed that he landed back in the square, right in the same location of honor as Mistress Red Dust and the other heirs of the heavenly kings. It was there that he spoke out in a voice that crashed like heavenly thunder. Many thanks to you, Your Majesty. Your humble servant Bai Hao managed to snatch a diva soul. With that, he thrust the Foundation Establishment soul high up into the air for everyone to see clearly. Because of how loudly and suddenly he had spoken, virtually all of the nobility and aristocracy in the square all looked over at him. As for Mistress Red Dust, she was the closest, and when she heard his words and saw the soul he was holding, her expression flickered. What are you doing, Bai Hao? Mistress Red Dust said in a berating tone. Get back to your place. Off to the side, Zhou Hong looked on with wide eyes. As for the junior champion king and the heir apparent from Spirit Advent City, they were all stunned by what they were seeing. The soul Bai Xiaochun was holding was clearly a Foundation Establishment level soul, and not a diva soul. They weren't the only ones to react in such a way. Chen Haosong and the heavenly dukes were all completely taken aback. However, within moments, their gazes turned as sharp as blades, and the same thought ran through all their minds. Could it be that he wants to force the emperor to abdicate? The heavenly marquises began to react as well, and were clearly flustered. No one had any idea what exactly was going to happen next. A diva soul? That's not a diva soul. Is Bai Hao an idiot or something? Discussion began to spread within the square. As for Zhao Xianglin, he clearly didn't see that something fishy was going on, and loudly said, "Did your eyes fall out, Bai Hao? That's a foundation establishment level soul, not a diva soul. If you think that's a diva soul, then you've obviously gone crazy. Why don't you just say it's a demigod soul?" Mocking laughter could be heard among the crowd, but Bai Xiaochun ignored it. His gaze was fixed solely on the dragon throne and the arch-emperor. As for the imperial princes and princesses, various expressions could be seen on their faces. Among them was the second prince, who knew Bai Xiaochun a bit better than the others. He couldn't help but look over, alarm written on his face. What is he doing? Don't tell me he's going to try to get father to bow his head in submission? The arch-emperor sat there on his throne, his eyes shining brightly as he stared at Bai Xiaochun. Although Bai Xiaochun seemed excited, he was actually profoundly nervous, and the arch-emperor's shining eyes had his heart pounding. However, before he could say anything, one of the two stooped, sinister old men spoke in a voice that thrummed with killing intent. "What gall you have? That's obviously a foundation establishment level soul. How dare you try to deceive His Majesty?" Even as the old man spoke, he stepped forward in Bai Xiaochun's direction, and the aura of a diva exploded out. He was attacking with full force, clearly intending to kill Bai Xiaochun in one move, drawing on full force and full speed to cut him down on the spot. The sinister old man attacked with lightning-like speed, to the extent that Mistress Red Dust and the other heirs apparent didn't even have time to react. In fact, Mistress Red Dust was actually inclined to do something, but simply wasn't fast enough to. The old man's cultivation base erupted with diva fluctuations as he appeared right in front of Bai Xiaochun. There, he called upon the powers of a diva to become one with all creation and take the shape of an enormous magical symbol. Of course, Bai Xiaochun was shocked, and immediately tried to back up. From what he could tell, this old man was more terrifying than Chen Haosong. A single strike from him would be completely catastrophic. I say one thing he doesn't like, and he tries to kill me. Bai Xiaochun was scared to death. However, even as he tremblingly backed up from the sinister man, the Grand Heaven Master smiled. It was a profound and meaningful smile, and at the same time, a flicker of praise could be seen in his eyes. Reaching out, he waved his right finger in Bai Xiaochun's direction. Instantly, a shield of black light appeared around Bai Xiaochun, almost like a bubble that completely surrounded him. All of this takes a bit of time to describe, but actually took place in the time it takes a spark to fly off of a piece of flint. Then, the enormous magical symbol that was the incarnation of the sinister old man slammed into the bubble. A huge boom rang out, and the entire imperial palace quaked. The bubble collapsed, and the old man appeared, face ashen as he coughed up a mouthful of blood. The backlash sent him tumbling backward to slam into the ground inside the main hall, where he coughed up some more blood. Then he turned to look at the Grand Heaven Master. "Grand Heaven Master, you..." Before he could finish speaking, the Grand Heaven Master looked at him, causing him to tremble. Whatever else he had planned to say stuck in his throat. "Calm down and let Bai Hao finish speaking," the Grand Heaven Master said coolly. As for the Arch-Emperor, he was now gripping the arms of the dragon throne so tightly that blue veins could be seen bulging out on the backs of his hands. Bai Xiaochun swallowed hard. The black bubble from moments ago had ensured that he came out of the incident completely unharmed. However, the sensation of deadly crisis he had felt still lingered, causing his heart to tremble. And yet, he had already started down this path, and there was no turning back. A cold gleam in his eye, he calmed himself and spoke in a loud voice. "Listen, you ignoramus. I'm not trying to deceive His Majesty. This is a diva soul. Are you blind or something? Furthermore, I didn't ask your opinion about the matter. Grand Heaven Master, would you mind providing an assessment? What type of soul is this, sir?" The mysterious smile on the Grand Heaven Master's face was visible for everyone to see as he replied, "A diva soul." As soon as the words left his mouth, the imperial princes and princesses gasped, and their faces flickered with various emotions. Some of them, such as the second prince and the Grand Prince, went completely pale. The Grand Heaven Master is trying to get father to bow his head in submission. He's going to force him to say that it's a diva soul. The Grand Heaven Master is reasserting his authority. Even the most unintelligent of the officials and aristocracy could see what was going on. In response, the facial expressions of everyone present changed immediately, with few becoming excited or happy. Mistress Red Dust took a deep breath and looked over at Bai Xiaochun with a complicated expression. Zhou Hong's eyes were lit up with fear as he realized that the Grand Heaven Master was going to force the Arch-Emperor's hand. The more Zhou Hong thought about how Bai Xiaochun was going about this task, the more terrified he became. The junior champion king stood there quietly, and the heir apparent of the Spirit Advent King bowed his head. Chen Haosong and the other heavenly dukes stood in silent introspection, clearly hoping that they didn't get dragged into what was happening. Bai Xiaochun could see the veins bulging out on the Arch-Emperor's hands, and could sense the killing intent in his eyes. Although it was a frightening sight, Bai Xiaochun reminded himself that he was on the side of the Grand Heaven Master. Furthermore, he couldn't help but think back to how the Imperial clan had been behind the attack on his spirit enhancement shop. Gritting his teeth, he said, "The Grand Heaven Master said that it's a diva soul." "Your Majesty, what do you say, sir? What kind of soul is this?" In response, the Arch-Emperor sat there on his dragon throne, his eyes growing colder than ever. All of the heavenly marquises and heavenly dukes stood there with hearts pounding, averting their gazes downward. The veins on the Arch-Emperor's hands bulged larger than ever, and his eyes were colder than the coldest winter wind. It looked like he desired wholeheartedly to skin Bai Xiaochun alive. The person to speak next was the second sinister old man. Inside, he was grumbling bitterly, but as a servant to the Imperial clan for many generations, he felt that he had to speak up. "What gall you have, Bai Hao? This is complete hogwash. That's obviously a Foundation establishment level soul. How could anyone think it's a diva soul?" At this point, Bai Xiaochun took in a casual, lazy breath. Then, he glared at the old man and raised the Foundation establishment level soul high into the air. Slowly turning to look at the assembled aristocracy and officials, he cleared his throat. "Heavenly marquises, heavenly dukes, would you mind helping out a bit? Is this a Foundation establishment level soul, or a diva soul?" Bai Xiaochun was really starting to get excited, as he had finally reached the end goal of his plan. Everything that he had done up to this point had been a feint. He had intentionally let everyone believe that he was going to try to force the Arch-Emperor to abdicate, or at least bow his head. But the truth was that his goal was not to force the hand of the Arch-Emperor, but rather, all of the government officials and aristocrats. All of this had stemmed from his assertion that he could give the Grand Heaven Master a chance to see what Bai Xiaochun could not, what everyone was thinking. Bai Xiaochun's unexpected words caught everyone off guard. All of a sudden, veins bulged out on the Arch-Emperor's face as he realized that things were far worse than he had initially taken them to be. As for the two sinister old men, their faces completely drained of blood. The imperial princes and princesses trembled, and some of them were even sighing inwardly. All of the aristocrats and officials suddenly felt like they were suffocating. Earlier, they had hoped to stay out of what had appeared to be the Grand Heaven Master and the Arch-Emperor butting heads. And at first, it had seemed that they were succeeding. But then, with no warning at all, this damnable Bai Hao turned everything around and targeted them. Mistress Red Dust's eyes went wide, as if this was her first time truly seeing Bai Xiaochun. The junior champion king and the heir apparent of the Spirit Advent King were both gasping in terror. Bai Xiaochun's act from earlier, and the way he had controlled the flow of events, had been masterful, to say the least. Almost no one could have been prepared at all for the realization that Bai Xiaochun's true goal was actually the officials and aristocrats. However, there were a few in the audience who had not been caught completely off guard. Chen Haosong and the other 9 heavenly dukes had actually begun to speculate from the very beginning that Bai Xiaochun was putting on an act. Some of the heavenly marquises had also begun to work things out earlier on. And yet, that understanding didn't help them resolve the issue they now faced, and all of them were cursing vehemently in their hearts. As for everyone who had had issues with Bai Xiaochun in the past, the sudden turn of events caused their faces to fall, and their hatred of him to grow even more intense. By this point, everyone could tell that the Grand Heaven Master was helping this Bai Hao, and was using the soul in question to determine the attitudes of everyone present. It was an issue that everyone present wished to avoid, but now they were stuck in a dead end. As such, the hatred they felt toward Bai Xiaochun penetrated all the way to their marrow. In the past, they had been able to take advantage of the general political instability to their own advantage. But now, they had to publicly reveal their loyalties. And that was not an easy choice to make. If they stated that Bai Xiaochun was holding a Foundation establishment level soul, the Grand Heaven Master would most definitely not forgive and forget. But if they said it was a diva soul, then the Grand Heaven Master would have his hooks in them well and good. And that meant that if the Arch-Emperor ever managed to gain power back, they and their clans would definitely be purged by death. Of course, some could consider attempting to secretly maintain loyalty to the Arch-Emperor, while simultaneously proclaiming themselves for the Grand Heaven Master. But that would not be easy, considering that they were speaking out publicly. Whether or not the Grand Heaven Master believed their act or not wouldn't matter. Nor would it matter that the Arch-Emperor might understand their actions. Not only would it be a big embarrassment, but they would be giving their enemies an opportunity to use against them. The slightest slip-up later on in the future could lead to terrible results. Most important of all in the situation was the fact that there was no way the Grand Heaven Master would actually trust any proclamations of loyalty made here today. And yet, that wasn't what he wanted. He wanted the power that would come with everyone siding with him, whether they were sincere or not. With that power, he could easily crush all of the influence the Arch-Emperor had secretly built up. Not only would everyone realize that they had once again been dominated by the Grand Heaven Master, but anyone who had once felt loyalty to the Arch-Emperor would now be struck with terror. This was a show of strength, and at the same time, a threat. This Bai Hao is a good-for-nothing wretch. How shameless, so ruthless. Damn it, he's forcing us to publicly reveal our stance. Hatred swelled in the hearts of all present, and at the same time, fear of Bai Xiaochun. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.